The air was thick with the familiar scent of rosemary pot roast as I sat at my parents' polished oak dining table, the soft clink of silverware filling the gaps between forced small talk. It was the second Sunday of October, our so-called family dinner tradition in the Monroe household, and as usual I had arrived 10 minutes late, a tiny act of rebellion that nobody noticed or cared about. My name is Harper Monroe. I'm 29, and I've built a life of order and independence in Denver after years of being the forgotten middle child. But that night, my sanctuary, the life I fought tooth and nail for, was about to be ripped from me in a single breath. My father, David, cleared his throat in that all-too-familiar way that signaled the true reason we were summoned. I barely glanced up from swirling my wine, expecting yet another announcement about Logan's newest hobby or Sienna's latest breakup. Instead, I froze. "Sienna will be moving into your apartment for a while," my father declared casually, as if announcing the dinner menu had been switched from chicken to beef. I blinked, certain I had misheard. My sister Sienna, the golden child whose constant disasters were always cleaned up by my parents, sat across from me with a smug, satisfied smile. I stared down at my glass, tightening my grip to keep my hand from trembling. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs as my mother added cheerfully, "It just makes sense, sweetheart. You work late anyway, and you barely use that second bedroom." I couldn't breathe. My apartment wasn't just walls and furniture. It was 5 years of extra shifts, skipped vacations, and quiet sacrifices. It was my safe place, and now they had claimed it as communal family property without so much as a conversation. The heat rose to my cheeks, but I swallowed the scream, clawing its way up my throat. Instead, I nodded slowly, my voice cold and flat. "I'll have to check my lease agreement." They took my response as compliance. They always did. But as I sat there, feeling the crushing weight of years of unspoken expectations closing in again, something inside me shifted for the first time. Not this time. Not again. I wasn't born a fighter. I was born a Monroe. And in this family, that meant learning to endure. As a child growing up in our classic Denver craftsman home with its creaky wooden floors and perfectly trimmed hedges, I quickly understood my role. My older sister, Sienna, dazzled everyone with her reckless charm and dramatic flair. My younger brother Logan was the adorable wild card who could do no wrong. I was the responsible one, the quiet fixer, the forgotten middle piece that held the family machine together, but was never admired for it. At 15, I was volunteered to babysit our cousins' unruly twins every Saturday for an entire summer, only finding out after the plans had been finalized. In college, I got a call one morning to inform me that relatives I barely knew had been given my off-campus address because they needed a place to stay for a wedding weekend. Every protest I raised was met with guilt-laden accusations of selfishness. Family helps family, Harper. Why do you always make things difficult? So I stopped objecting. I became the quiet daughter, the agreeable daughter, the one they could always rely on to bend so things wouldn't break. But while Sienna bounced from failed art careers to relationships funded by our parents, and Logan spent years drifting between half-finished degrees and soul-searching trips, I worked. I earned a full scholarship to the University of Colorado Boulder and juggled 3 part-time jobs: barista, campus tutor, and library assistant. Every dollar I saved went toward my ultimate goal, a place of my own. When I signed the lease to my downtown Denver apartment in 2022, it was more than just renting an address. It was victory. My small 2-bedroom with exposed brick and golden morning light on the hardwood floors symbolized years of relentless hustle. My tiny office space, tucked next to the living room window, wasn't just an extra room. It was the beating heart of my independence, my dreams, and my work as an environmental consultant. But I was always the overlooked child. At family milestones, my accomplishments barely registered. When I graduated college summa cum laude, my parents offered a lukewarm, "That's nice." When Sienna's watercolor paintings were featured in a tiny coffee shop gallery, they threw her a catered party. In 2023, something inside me snapped. I walked into my first therapy session shaking, unsure of what to even say. I was 28 and exhausted. My therapist, kind and patient, gently taught me the hardest truth I had never been allowed to believe. Boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are survival. I began small. I declined hosting Thanksgiving for the first time ever, politely citing my heavy workload. My mother's sharp, "Oh, so you can't even help your own family anymore," stung like a slap, but I stood firm. The guilt didn't crush me this time. I told myself these monthly family dinners would be my one concession, a way to stay connected without sacrificing too much. I thought I had learned to manage it. I thought I had finally wrestled some control back from the endless current of obligation. I was wrong. That night, staring across the table at Sienna's smirk and my parents' expectant faces, I realized they hadn't noticed a thing had changed. They still believed I would fold as I always had. The apartment I had clawed and scraped to build for myself. They viewed it as community property, just another extension of their control. But something felt different this time. A quiet steeliness settled in my chest. I pushed my chair back and excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of refilling my glass. As I stood alone, staring at the vintage clock ticking on the wall, I whispered the words I had barely dared to believe. Not this time. The sun had dipped below the jagged skyline of downtown Denver as I pulled up to my parents' house that evening, deliberately arriving 10 minutes late. It was a small rebellion, but the only one I could safely allow myself, or so I had thought. The front porch light flickered against the crisp October air as my father greeted me with a brisk side hug and his usual grumble about traffic. Inside, the house smelled exactly the same as it had every family dinner for the last 20 years. Pot roast, green beans drowning in butter, and my mother's lemon squares waiting on the sideboard. Sienna was already there, sprawled luxuriously across the living room couch, her expensive designer boots disrespectfully propped on our mother's antique coffee table. My stomach twisted. I couldn't imagine ever getting away with that. I walked in and smiled politely. Logan arrived 20 minutes later, earning only warm laughter, and "We were about to start without you," from Mom. My lateness had been an offense. His, an endearing quirk. Dinner began the way it always did. Dad dominating conversation with sweeping declarations about politics and business. Mom interjecting with questions about our week that were barely veiled segues into her own neighborhood gossip. I gave my rehearsed, sanitized update about my latest environmental project. No one really listened. Then it happened. Dad cleared his throat, the family signal that the real conversation was about to begin. I knew before he even opened his mouth that whatever came next would somehow upend my carefully maintained peace. "Sienna has some news," he announced, as though he were introducing a presidential press conference. Sienna barely looked up from scrolling her phone under the table. With a practiced flick of her hair, she sighed dramatically. "Jason and I broke up," she said flatly, naming her boyfriend of 8 months, the one who spent our last barbecue lecturing me about Bitcoin mining. Now he's being a total jerk about the apartment lease. My mother gasped in sympathy, reaching across the table to squeeze Sienna's hand as if the world itself had turned against her precious daughter. "It's just awful, darling. You shouldn't have to deal with this stress on top of everything else." I nodded automatically, the way I always had, while calculating exactly how much longer I needed to stay before I could leave. "So," my father continued, cutting into his roast with surgical precision, "we've worked it out. Sienna will move into your place while she gets back on her feet." The words struck like a punch to my chest. I stared down at my plate as though the food could anchor me to reality. Surely I had misunderstood, but my mother beamed at me, her voice breezy. "It makes perfect sense, sweetheart. You're hardly ever home. You work late at the office. You're traveling all the time anyway. It'll just be for a few months while Sienna finds a new place." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The familiar tightness wrapped around my chest like barbed wire. This wasn't a suggestion. This was an order dressed up as family support. "I actually use my office," I said carefully, each word weighed like a grenade I was trying not to detonate. "I've been taking on freelance projects. I need a dedicated space." Sienna scoffed loudly. "You can work at the kitchen table. I did that in college." The irony burned. Sienna's art degree had taken her 5.5 years to finish, fully funded by my parents, interrupted by multiple mental health breaks, shopping sprees, and self-discovery retreats. My practical degree had been crammed into 4 exhausting years of classes, work, and survival. "It's just temporary," Dad added firmly, mistaking my stunned silence for reluctant agreement. Family helps family. Mom was already scrolling through her phone. "We can move her things next Saturday. Your building has visitor parking, right?" I stared at them. They had already planned everything. My weekend, my space, my life. Without asking. Without even pretending I had a say. Across the table, Logan caught my eye for a split second before looking away, unwilling to step into the minefield. I stood at a familiar crossroads, speak up and face the tidal wave of collective disappointment, guilt, and manipulation, or surrender as I always had. But this time, something cold and clear settled inside me. "I'll need to check my lease about long-term guests," I said neutrally. Mom waved dismissively. "That's just a formality. They can't stop you from helping your sister." I nodded again, letting them believe my agreement was assured. Inside, a different plan was already taking shape. My quiet that night wasn't surrender. It was strategic retreat. As I helped clear the dishes, mapping out my next steps, I realized something profound. Acquiescence was no longer an option I could live with. The drive home that night felt different. Denver's skyline glowed faintly against the ink-black sky as I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. My mind replayed the dinner conversation over and over, every word cementing the decision that had begun to form in my chest. I would not give in this time. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my apartment building, turned off the ignition, and sat for several minutes, staring at nothing. I had been conditioned to comply, to avoid confrontation at any cost. But something about tonight, the final invasion of my last safe space, had pushed me past that limit. Inside my apartment, I walked slowly from room to room, running my hand over the smooth edges of my desk, the couch I had saved 6 months for, the bookshelf lined with paperbacks I'd collected since college. My tiny home office, the spare room they so casually dismissed, wasn't just a room. It was a symbol of every late night, every sacrifice, every moment I had clawed back some dignity from years of family expectation. I opened my laptop and pulled up my lease agreement, scanning the document with increasing relief. Subletting was strictly prohibited without management approval. Guests staying longer than 2 weeks required written consent, background checks, and were subject to denial. My building had rules. Rules my parents couldn't override. The next morning, I called my best friend Tasha, my voice shaking with a mixture of fury and excitement. "They did it again," I told her. Tasha didn't even need me to explain. "What now?" she sighed. She had been my confidant through countless family oversteps. I laid it all out. The plan to move Sienna into my home, the complete disregard for my boundaries, the expectation that I would quietly comply. "Oh, hell no," Tasha snapped. "Liv, you cannot let this happen again." "I'm not going to," I whispered. For the first time, I meant it. We talked through options. Confrontation had never worked. My family had mastered overwhelming me with guilt and persistence. I needed something they couldn't argue with, something legal. "What if you just weren't there?" Tasha suggested, her tone suddenly sharp. "What if they showed up, movers and all, and you were simply gone?" The idea planted itself immediately. I had unused vacation time and a professional development conference in Seattle. I could easily move up. I could leave the weekend they planned to take over my home. But even better, I could ensure someone else was legally occupying my apartment during my absence. I paced the living room, adrenaline now replacing the panic. My colleague Marcus had mentioned only days earlier that his condo was undergoing emergency repairs, and he was looking for a temporary place to stay. Responsible, quiet, and completely unknown to my family, he was perfect. I grabbed my phone and texted him. Random, but important question. Would you consider a temporary sublease for 2 weeks? I draw up paperwork. Full approval by the building. It's totally legit, I promise. His reply came within minutes. This might be perfect timing. Let's talk. My shoulders sagged in relief. The first piece of my plan clicked into place. Later that evening, I drafted a detailed checklist. 1. Review tenant rights under Colorado law. 2. Contact building management to clarify sublease policies. 3. Coordinate with Marcus to formalize paperwork. 4. Schedule vacation travel to coincide with the move date. 5. Move irreplaceable valuables to my storage unit. 6. Install a small legal security camera inside the apartment entryway. 7. Prepare a written notice for building security that Marcus would be the temporary occupant. The following morning, I emailed Vanessa, the property manager who had processed my lease 2 years earlier. I kept it casual. I'm considering having a friend stay while I'm away on business for a couple of weeks. Could you remind me of the guest policy? Vanessa responded within hours, attaching the formal policy sheet. Any stay beyond 14 consecutive days must be approved by management. The guest must pass a background and credit check. Without that paperwork, security will deny access. We're very strict about unauthorized occupants. I smiled for the first time in days. They had no idea what was coming. By midnight, my anxiety had transformed into something new. Calm, focused determination. For the first time, I wasn't lying awake preparing defenses or apologies. I was planning an airtight resolution that even my parents' relentless pressure couldn't undo. The final step fell into place when Marcus confirmed his interest. I'm totally fine being the bad guy if your family shows up, he joked. I've been through a messy divorce. I know how to handle crazy family drama. I laughed quietly, grateful for his understanding. Just the facts, Marcus. No explanations. No drama. As I shut off my laptop and got ready for bed, I stared around my little apartment. Soon, my family's assumptions would crash headfirst into a reality they had never imagined. I had drawn the line, and this time I wasn't stepping back. The next 7 days unfolded with quiet, ruthless precision. Monday morning, I stopped by the building's management office before work. Vanessa greeted me warmly and handed me the official sublease paperwork. Any stay longer than 2 weeks requires this form filed and approved. If anyone shows up trying to move in without paperwork, security will deny them access. Her words felt like armor. I texted Marcus over lunch and explained everything, careful not to mention the dysfunctional nightmare brewing behind the scenes. I just need someone responsible in my place while I travel for work. I'll prepare the paperwork and provide keys. You'd have legal occupancy, no awkward questions. He responded within the hour. Count me in. This works perfectly with my condo repairs. Let me know when. The following evening, I received the first text from Sienna. Sienna, Mom says I should check what furniture I can bring. I'm thinking my bedroom set would look better in your office than whatever you have in there. The sheer audacity of it made me stare at my phone in disbelief. I typed back carefully, I'm figuring out a few logistics with the apartment. Let's touch base next week. Vague, non-committal, just enough to stall. Wednesday evening, Marcus came over. I walked him through the apartment, pointed out the fuse box, showed him the security camera I had quietly installed in the entryway. We filled out and signed the sublease agreement. I filed the signed paperwork with building management that night and provided written notice to security. Before Marcus left, I paused awkwardly. There's one more thing. My family doesn't know about this arrangement. They may show up expecting to move my sister in. You're under no obligation to explain anything to them. Just state you're the legal occupant and show the paperwork if necessary. Marcus smiled knowingly. Your family sounds like mine. Don't worry, Harper. I've got this. Thursday, I called our HR department and requested to use vacation time plus remote work accommodation for the week. I booked a small hotel on the Oregon coast and set my phone notification preferences to silent, except for Marcus and work contacts. By Friday, my parents had escalated. My mother called twice about visitor parking passes. Oh, and can you please clear out some of your bookshelves? Sienna's bringing her collectibles, and she'll need space. I kept my tone breezy and distracted. I'm slammed with work right now. I'll figure it out next week. Inside, I clenched my fists. I stared at my bookshelves, filled with novels and professional manuals I had painstakingly chosen. I imagined them replaced by framed concert posters and random art prints Sienna had picked up during her many creative phases. No. Saturday morning, I moved my passport, important financial documents, childhood keepsakes, and irreplaceable jewelry into a rented storage locker across town. I double-checked that Marcus had a copy of the keys, the building access code, and the security team's contact information. Later that day, another text from Dad popped up. Dad, we'll arrive at 11 a.m. next Saturday with the truck. Have the parking pass ready. Please clear space in the hall closet for Sienna's coats. There wasn't a single question mark, not a single attempt to ask if this worked for me. Just orders, expectations, entitlement. I stared at the message for a long time. My pulse slowed, then steadied. I did not reply. Sunday morning, I met with Marcus one final time. I handed him the apartment keys and access card, along with a printed copy of the signed sublease and the building's occupancy policy. Are you sure you're comfortable with this? I asked one last time. Marcus chuckled as he sipped his coffee. Harper, I've had worse family drama at Thanksgiving dinner. I'll keep it professional and calm. I smiled gratefully. Thank you. That night, I packed my suitcase and loaded it into my car. I stared around my apartment one last time. The late autumn sunlight cast soft amber stripes across the floorboards I had once laid out throw rugs on as a broke 26-year-old. I walked from the office to the living room to my bedroom, running my fingertips across the edges of everything I had earned. Tomorrow my family would arrive with boxes, movers, and assumptions, and they would find nothing waiting for them but reality. I whispered aloud, "This time I choose me." Then I locked the door behind me. The next morning, I woke to the soft patter of Oregon rain tapping against the window of my cozy coastal hotel room. The sun hadn't fully risen over the jagged shoreline. I stretched, walked to the window, and stared at the waves crashing onto the dark rocks. My phone rested face down on the nightstand, notifications silenced. For the first time in years, I felt calm. At 7:30 a.m., the first ping came from my security app. I flipped the phone over and tapped the live feed. My mother stood at my apartment door, her raincoat cinched tight against the cold Denver wind, repeatedly pressing the doorbell. My father pounded on the door with his fist, his jaw clenched in frustration. Sienna stood behind them with crossed arms, dramatically rolling her eyes as if she were the true victim in this scenario. I sipped my coffee, watching in silence. The text started rolling in. 8:15 a.m. Sienna. Where are you? We need the parking pass. 8:37 a.m. Mom. Call me. Now. 8:52 a.m. Dad. This is ridiculous. We're almost there. 9 a.m. Sienna. Dad borrowed Uncle Steve's truck for my dresser. Be ready to open up. I ignored every single one. At 11:03 a.m. sharp, the cameras showed my parents and Sienna back at the door, movers lingering awkwardly behind them with dollies and boxes wrapped in shrink wrap. My father's face darkened with anger as he knocked harder, then tried the handle. Locked. They left the screen momentarily. I guess they had gone to plead with building security. The camera feed resumed 10 minutes later, showing a uniformed security officer calmly speaking with them in the hallway. From the animated gestures of my mother's hands and the stiff posture of my father, I could tell the answer wasn't what they wanted. Just as Sienna was turning to storm off in frustration, my front door opened. Marcus appeared, calm and casual, wearing sweats and holding a coffee mug. Even without sound, I could read the confusion and then dawning horror on my family's faces. My mother staggered back, clutching her chest dramatically. My father stepped forward, pointing aggressively at Marcus, no doubt insisting they had my permission. Marcus stood cool and unbothered, handing over a copy of the signed sublease and the building policy to the security guard. The officer stepped between my father and Marcus, firmly shaking his head. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The scene lasted less than 5 minutes. My father's rigid back and clenched fists as he stalked back toward the elevator told me everything. My mother followed, gesturing wildly at Sienna, who stood frozen with her jaw open in silent disbelief. They were gone. I set my phone down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. I should have felt panicked, but I didn't. I felt weightless, free. My phone vibrated violently. 5 missed calls from my father, 3 voicemails from my mother, 10 increasingly unhinged text messages from Sienna. You are a selfish monster. You betrayed your own family. You're dead to me. I forwarded the worst of them to Tasha, who had insisted on staying updated. She replied immediately, They are spiraling. Stay strong. You did everything right. At 1:17 p.m., Marcus called. Your dad tried to insist I was a squatter, he said, laughing softly. The security guy threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. They backed off pretty fast after that. I smiled. You're my hero, Marcus. No worries. Honestly, it was almost entertaining. I stared out at the ocean again, realizing for the first time that I wasn't filled with guilt. The fear and anxiety I'd always felt after defying my family had been replaced with something new, peace, and an almost giddy sense of satisfaction. That evening, the messages shifted in tone. My aunt called, leaving a syrupy voicemail. Harper, everyone's just so worried about you. This isn't like you. Call your parents, please. I deleted it without responding. At 10:30 p.m., my father left one final voicemail, deliberately calm but laced with fury. Your mother is distraught. Sienna has nowhere to go. Whatever point you're trying to prove, you've made it. This childish stunt ends now. Call us first thing in the morning to arrange access to the apartment. I laughed, something I had never done after any previous family confrontation. The guilt was still there, faint like a fading bruise, but it no longer controlled me. I whispered aloud to the empty hotel room, This isn't a stunt. This is my life. As I curled up under the soft hotel comforter and silenced my phone again, I knew tomorrow's storm was coming. But I also knew I was ready for it. They had always expected me to fold. They had never expected me to win. The morning after the confrontation felt oddly quiet, as if the entire world had paused to catch its breath. I lay in bed staring at the soft gray ceiling of my hotel room while the coastal fog drifted lazily past the window. My phone, still on Do Not Disturb mode, blinked quietly with a handful of new notifications. I reluctantly checked the security app. My apartment remained untouched. There had been no further attempts to enter overnight. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The first message came at 7:15 a.m. Sienna. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I have nowhere to go. Is this because I borrowed your sweater in high school and stretched it out? I said I was sorry. I stared in disbelief, almost laughing. The ability to reduce the invasion of my home to a stretched-out sweater was so quintessentially Sienna that it felt surreal. I didn't respond. By mid-morning, my mother's voicemail softened from rage to bargaining. Maybe Sienna could just stay for 2 weeks while she finds another place. We could even give you a little rent if that's what this is about. Family helps family, Harper. The implication that my stand was over money, not boundaries, hurt more than I expected. They still didn't understand. They had never understood. An hour later, my father switched tactics, leaving a voicemail in his controlled, businesslike tone. "We understand you feel upset. We should have communicated better. Let's sit down and talk this through as adults. I'm sure we can come to a reasonable solution that works for everyone." There it was, the first acknowledgement, however reluctant, that they might have overstepped. I let the message sit. Around noon, an unexpected text popped up from Logan. My brother had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal. "Logan, Mom and Dad are freaking out. Sienna's staying at their place, whining nonstop. I'm not sure what you did, but respect. You stood your ground." I stared at the message for a long time. I hadn't realized how much I needed that tiny scrap of validation. Marcus kept me updated throughout the day. "Your father called the building office again this morning. Security told him the paperwork is airtight and legally binding." They hung up on him when he started yelling. I couldn't stop smiling. By Sunday evening, the wider family had clearly been recruited. My grandmother left a long, disappointed voicemail about the importance of sisters and how I would regret this selfishness one day when I was old and alone. My mother's sister emailed me a long, scolding message about the sacred bonds of family and how I should be ashamed for treating my sister this way. I didn't reply to either. I archived them in a folder I labeled emotional blackmail. Monday morning brought the inevitable practical problem. "Dad, we've got Sienna's stuff in a moving truck. It's costing us daily fees now. What do you suggest we do with your sister's belongings?" For the first time in my life, I let the silence hang. I didn't rush to fix their mistake. I didn't absorb the responsibility they tried to dump on me. By Monday afternoon, I received a text from my mother with a photo of Sienna sitting dramatically in their living room surrounded by boxes, her face twisted into an expression of victimized misery. The caption read, "This is what your stubbornness has caused." I stared at it, jaw tight, then calmly muted the thread and went online to research family therapy providers in Denver. I had decided, if we were ever going to rebuild anything, it would be with professional help. Tuesday brought the first actual sign that they were beginning to process reality. "Dad, we're looking at apartment listings for Sienna now. Let us know when you're ready to sit down and discuss what happened." No apology, no acknowledgement of the complete invasion of my privacy, but finally a pivot toward finding Sienna a place that wasn't my apartment. I drafted my reply carefully. "Me, I'm glad you're helping Sienna find her own space. I'll be back Friday. I'm willing to meet Saturday to discuss this in person." I hit send and stared out the window as the waves crashed steadily onto the shore. For the first time, I wasn't anxious about what came next. I wasn't rehearsing apologies or preparing to beg for understanding. I had set my boundary. I had held the line, and I had survived. Saturday afternoon arrived cloaked in warm, golden sunlight, the kind of crisp autumn day that made Denver feel almost serene. I arrived 15 minutes early at the small coffee shop I had chosen for the meeting. It was halfway between my apartment and my parents' home. Neutral ground, deliberately chosen. I ordered a cappuccino and took a seat at a corner table with a full view of the entrance. My pulse thrummed in my ears, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar certainty that I wasn't walking into this conversation as the submissive, apologetic daughter they expected. My mother walked in first, 5 minutes early as always, wearing her usual perfect lipstick and tightly buttoned cardigan. Her eyes flicked nervously toward me as I stood and extended a hand instead of leaning in for a hug. The gesture startled her slightly, but she recovered quickly and sat down across from me. Moments later, my father arrived with Sienna trailing behind. Dad's mouth was set in his familiar stern expression, the one that signaled, "This is going to be a difficult conversation." Sienna wore no makeup for once, her tired red-rimmed eyes betraying either lack of sleep or tears or both. We sat in stiff silence as I took a slow sip of coffee. My father broke first. "Harper, I think you owe us all an explanation for what happened last weekend." I exhaled steadily, already expecting this framing. "I think we need to talk about why you made plans for my home without asking me first." The directness seemed to knock them off balance. My mother's eyebrows arched slightly as Dad's jaw tightened. "We were trying to help your sister," Mom jumped in, her voice coated in practiced sweetness. "You have that extra room just sitting there. Sienna needed a place. Family helps family." I stared at them calmly. I understand Sienna needed help, but deciding she would move into my home without so much as a phone call or discussion wasn't help. That was a violation of my boundaries and my independence. My father leaned forward, frustration creeping into his voice. "Let's not overdramatize this. Invasion? Boundaries? We're talking about a temporary arrangement to support your sister, not a federal crime." There it was, the dismissive belittling I had anticipated. Only this time I was prepared. "Would you have made this same arrangement for Sienna to move into Logan's apartment without asking him first?" I asked softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad sat back slightly, stunned by the unexpected precision of my point. My mother's cheeks flushed. "That's different. Logan's situation isn't the same." "How?" I pressed, voice calm. "Because you respect Logan's space and decisions in a way you don't respect mine." Sienna shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with her cup. She looked genuinely confused, and suddenly I realized she had never questioned my parents' assumptions about me either. "I didn't know they hadn't talked to you first," Sienna admitted quietly. "They told me you were fine with it." My gaze flicked to my parents. My mother's eyes dropped to her coffee cup. My father opened his mouth, then shut it again. "We were going to discuss it with you," my mother murmured, "but we assumed once you understood Sienna's situation you'd agree." I shook my head. "That's exactly the problem. You assumed. You made plans for my home and my life without giving me the basic respect of a conversation. That can't happen anymore." The weight of my words hung between us. Slowly, my father nodded, still visibly irritated but forced to concede the point. "Perhaps we should have handled it differently. You've made yourself clear." It wasn't quite an apology, but for my father it was close. My mother sighed, her face softening slightly. "We just want what's best for both our daughters. You've always been so independent, Harper. I guess sometimes we forget you still need to feel heard." The understatement of the decade, I thought, but I nodded. I was never going to get a perfect reckoning from them. I would settle for this new reality. Sienna looked directly at me, her voice unusually sincere. "I'm sorry, Harper. I should have called you myself. I didn't mean to bulldoze your life like that." "Thank you," I said honestly. "I would have gladly helped you find a solution if I'd been asked instead of told." We shifted into logistics then, discussing the apartments my parents had started touring with Sienna, and even lightly planning for me to join them for viewing the following weekend. Before we parted, I made my final statement. "Going forward, I need you all to respect certain boundaries. Ask before assuming. Understand that I have the right to say no without being labeled difficult or selfish." My father nodded slowly. "Fair enough." My mother reached across the table and placed her hand next to mine, not touching, just close enough to offer connection without intrusion. "We love you, Harper. We'll try to be better." As we stood and gathered our things, Sienna hung back slightly. "I really am sorry," she whispered. "I've never seen anyone stand up to them like that. I'm kind of impressed." I smiled warmly for the first time in days. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As they left, I stepped out into the bright autumn sunlight. I had no illusions that everything was fixed, but the ground beneath my feet felt solid again, for the first time in a very long time. The week after the coffee shop meeting passed with a strange sense of calm. the eye of a long and brutal storm. When I returned to my apartment, I paused at the door, keys in hand, heart oddly light. The familiar scent of sandalwood and old books greeted me as I stepped inside. Every piece of furniture, every photo frame, every blanket was exactly where I had left it. Nothing had been touched. It felt like I had walked into the space for the first time. Only this time it was completely and unquestionably mine. I sat on the couch and stared at the bookshelf my father had so confidently suggested I clear out to make room for Sienna's belongings. I ran my hand slowly along the spines of the books I had carefully chosen over the years. Each one represented a moment, a memory, a choice I had made for myself. That simple act, touching what was mine and only mine, filled me with a quiet but overwhelming pride. My phone buzzed. This time it wasn't demands, accusations, or thinly veiled manipulations. It was my mother asking politely if I wanted to join the family for dinner next weekend. No pressure, no expectation, just a request. I responded with equal care. Thank you for inviting me. I'll let you know closer to the date. That alone felt like victory. Later that week, I met Sienna for lunch. Just the two of us. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like an obligation. She seemed different, quieter, more reflective, humbled perhaps by what had happened. As we picked at salads on the sunlit patio of a small cafe, she confessed, "They always made it sound like you were happy to help. I never even thought to question it. You were always the responsible one, the easy one, the one who never said no." I nodded slowly, realizing how deeply those narratives had been woven into both our lives. "I'm trying to be more independent," Sienna admitted. "Seeing you stand up to them made me realize I've let them run everything for me. I don't want that anymore." Her vulnerability surprised me. For the first time, I saw not the entitled golden child, but another daughter trying to step out from under the crushing weight of family expectations. The conversation marked a subtle shift. We talked about things we never had before: regrets, boundaries, and who we each wanted to be outside of the roles our parents had cast for us. A few days later, I helped Sienna move into her own small, one-bedroom apartment, a space she had chosen, negotiated for, and secured herself. As we carried in her final box, she looked around the bare walls and smiled faintly. "I've never done this without them before," she whispered. "I didn't think I could." "You can," I said firmly. "You just did." In that moment, standing in the middle of an empty apartment with my sister, I realized this wasn't just about protecting my boundaries. It had been the catalyst for change in all of us. The process would be slow, imperfect, and sometimes painful, but it had started. And I had started it. The holiday season arrived faster than I expected. As Christmas approached, I received a call from my mother. Her tone was noticeably softer, more tentative than it had ever been. "We're hosting Christmas dinner this year," she said. "Would you like to bring a side dish?" I paused, surprised at the careful way she framed the request. Not a demand, not an expectation, just a simple invitation. "I'd be happy to," I replied warmly. The evening was not perfect. Old patterns surfaced now and then. Small comments slipped out of habit. My father still struggled to hide his discomfort with the new family dynamic, and my mother occasionally fell back into trying to orchestrate every detail. But something had changed. They consulted each other rather than simply issuing decrees. Sienna gently declined my mother's unsolicited career advice without fear of backlash. And for the first time, I felt no anxiety about disagreeing on a small family decision. Later that night, as I unlocked my apartment door and stepped back into my peaceful space, I stood for a moment and breathed in the silence. The walls, the soft lights, the smell of cedar from the candle burning on my kitchen counter, all of it felt different now. Not because the apartment itself had changed, but because I had changed. The confrontation I had once feared more than anything had given me something far greater than the temporary discomfort of family disapproval. It had given me the gift of my own voice. I understood now, fully and deeply, that love without respect is not love at all. That healthy relationships require both care and boundaries. That saying no, even when it feels like betrayal, can be the most loving act you do for yourself and others. As I sat on the couch under a soft blanket, sipping tea, I stared out at the quiet city lights beyond my window. For the first time in my life, I smiled knowing I had protected the most precious thing I had, my independence. I had said no, and in doing so, I had finally said yes to myself.